Luke 5:27 through 39. And after these things, he, that is Jesus, went forth and saw a publican named Levi, sitting at the receipt of custom, and he said unto him, Follow me. And he left all, rose up, and followed him. And Levi made him a great feast in his own house. And there was a great company of publicans and of others that sat down with them. But their scribes and Pharisees murmured against his disciples, saying, Why do ye eat and drink with publicans and sinners? Jesus answering said unto them, They that are whole need not a physician, but they that are sick. I came not to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. They said unto him, Why do the disciples of John fast often and make prayers, and likewise the disciples of the Pharisees, but thine eat and drink? He, Jesus, said unto them, Can ye make the children of the bride chamber fast while the bridegroom is with them? But the days will come when the bridegroom shall be taken away from them, and then shall they fast in those days. I really wanted to say, in those days they shall fast. And he spake also a parable unto them. No man putteth a piece of new garment upon an old, if otherwise, then both the new make a rent, and the piece that was taken out of the new agreeth not with the old. And no man putteth new wine into old bottles, else the new wine will burst the bottles and be spilled, and the bottles shall perish. But new wine must be put in new bottles, and both are preserved. No man also having drunk old wine straightway desireth new, for he saith, The old is better. So, a couple weeks ago, I broke the rule of public speaking that said, the first point should be the shortest. That way your message seems shorter and it's like it's moving along faster than it actually is. Today I'm going to rectify that by having a super short first point and then long points 2 and 3. So let's try that. First, we see in this passage before us, we see forsaking everything to follow Jesus. Forsaking everything to follow Jesus. And after these things he went forth and saw a publican named Levi sitting at the receipt of custom, and he said unto him, Follow me, and he left all, rose up, and followed him. So as we saw last week, Jesus has just left teaching this large group of Pharisees and scribes, and at the end of that encounter, Jesus leaves them in amazement at the strange things they say they saw. Jesus healed a man, not just physically, but also spiritually, in which we saw a clear indication that he was saying he was God, but the Pharisees and scribes were blinded. They refused to see that as what was going on. Now, they're walking along the way. We don't know how long after this is. They're walking along, and Jesus sees a man named Levi sitting at the receipt of custom. That would have been the booth that he sat at to collect the taxes for that area or roadway or whatever it was. For our understanding, I have a fairly lengthy quote from the Lexham Bible Dictionary to help us understand Levi and his position. Tax collectors, also known as publicans, charge tolls and taxes on behalf of the Roman government. These private government subcontractors would tax travelers who were carrying merchandise between properties or delivering goods along certain well-defined roads. Rome preferred to hire locals who were familiar with a region's inhabitants' lands and roads. Some tax agents were responsible for large territories that they functioned as subcontractors, hiring their own employees to collect the taxes. Zacchaeus seems to fit this category as he is described as a chief tax collector. Tax collectors earned a profit by demanding a higher tax from the people apparently I can't put words together today. Tax collectors earned a profit by demanding a higher tax from the people than they had prepaid to the Roman government. This system led to widespread corruption and greed. The tax collecting profession was saturated with unscrupulous people who overtaxed others to maximize their personal gain. According to Adams, the toll collectors were in a profession that was open to dishonesty and oppression of their neighbor. Since the Jews considered themselves victims of Roman oppression, Jewish tax collectors who overtaxed their fellow countrymen were especially despised. Jews viewed such favor for Rome as betrayal and equal to treason against God. Rabbinic sources consistently align Jewish tax collectors with robbers. Levi, in verse 27, is later clarified to us as being Matthew, the one who wrote the Gospel of Matthew. And in his Gospel record, Levi records his calling to follow Jesus like we have here in Luke. Mark, whose account is primarily from the viewpoint of Simon Peter, also records the calling of Levi. And all three, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, all record the exact same things about this calling of Levi. Jesus simply goes by this man and says, "Follow me." He leaves everything and follows Jesus. All three of them. It doesn't say anything else other than that. Just Jesus said, "Follow me." Levi goes and follows him. We don't know if Jesus knew Levi beforehand. We don't know if Jesus had walked that specific road beforehand and paid a toll to him beforehand. We don't know if there was some kind of interaction where Levi had saw Jesus at one point in time in one of these groups and crowds. We have no background. Excuse me. We have no background, but all we know for certain is when Levi heard the voice of Jesus saying, "Follow me," he had to leave everything and follow Jesus. How many times have we, people that are saved, felt compelled of God to do something, and instead of reacting immediately like Levi did, we just stall and try and convince God, "Well, why not me? You don't want me to do that. You should call somebody else to do that, or you should get this person to do that." Might we all adopt the attitude of Levi that just says, when Jesus tells me to do, I'm going to just go do. So there's a short point one. Super quick and easy. Now in the rest of the passage before us, we see two problems that the Pharisees and scribes have with Jesus and his disciples. The first issue comes about when this tax collector, Levi, makes a feast for Jesus. And so the first part of this is free feasts and foregoing fast. Free feasts and foregoing fasts. Verse 29. And Levi made him a great feast in his own house. And there was a great company of publicans and of others that sat down with them. But their scribes and Pharisees murmured against his disciples, saying, "Why do ye eat and drink with publicans and sinners?" And Jesus, answering, said unto them, "They that are whole need not a physician, but they that are sick. I came not to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance." So in this story that we're told before us, immediately after following Jesus, Levi then makes in his own home a great feast, invites a bunch of his friends, other tax collectors, who were probably his only friends, other tax collectors, and other people come to the feast as well, but they're all there. Now, Levi, as best as we can understand, he's probably fairly well off if he's been doing this tax collecting thing for any length of time. He's cheated a lot of people and robbed a lot of people. So, Levi's leaving everything and following Jesus. Yes, he still has his own home. Yes, he still had the money that he had, but he walked away from his tax booth without hesitation to follow Jesus. And he spends a great deal of what he has to this feast at his house. But rather than being shocked that a publican of all people, the person that stood to gain the most throughout life as far as monetary aspect goes, rather than being shocked that he followed Jesus, rather than trying to figure out why is Jesus so different that even the tax collectors will follow him, rather than doing that, they chose to complain. Exactly. Never mind that the publican of all people has turned from his wicked ways of stealing and cheating and robbing and is now following a rabbi. Levi just makes this big feast, invites all these people to come. And Jesus, with his loose morals, sits down and eats with tax collectors and sinners. Publicans, in verse 30, publicans and sinners in Luke chapter 5, as we see here. Publicans are also listed in Matthew 18 with heathens Gentile, which would be Gentiles, those that are not Jews, not part of this group that worship God. In Matthew 21, they're also listed publicans and harlots, so they're put together with this group of unsavory people that you're not allowed to be around. Now, the story gets even crazier, because everybody's sitting down, everybody's at this great feast, eating this food, and their scribes and Pharisees, meaning the ones that are in this town, they come up, they're kind of standing nearby. Now remember, they're not allowed to go into this great feast necessarily and partake. They would not be caught at all partaking in this feast, because, again, publicans, tax, and sinners, we're not associating with this group, but they are there. They're either standing outside the windows or they're just kind of standing off to the side. Somehow, in some way, they're doing this. They either go to the disciples or they call some of the disciples over to them, one of the two, and says, "Why are you eating with tax collectors and sinners?" And the word we have, they murmured against the disciples. That's the word complain. That's what they're doing. They're complaining to the disciples. Why are you eating with tax collectors and sinners? Now, skip back to last week again. A man is let down in front of Jesus, and immediately Jesus says to the man, "Your sins are forgiven." And then the Pharisees and scribes immediately begin to think about, who does this man think he is that he can forgive sins? And Jesus immediately responds to their thoughts. They didn't even get a chance to voice out their thoughts. Jesus instantly responded to them in what they were thinking. And just the same here, the Pharisees and the scribes are saying to the disciples, "Why on earth are you guys eating with tax collectors and sinners?" And before the disciples can respond, Jesus on the other side of the room from the table speaks up and responds to them and what they just said. Not that he probably couldn't hear, maybe he could hear them. But if he couldn't hear them, it makes him even more insane that Jesus knows what's going on, knows that the Pharisees and scribes are saying this to the disciples, and he looks there and says out loud for everybody to hear, "It's not those that are healthy that need a doctor, but those that are sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance." Healthy people don't need doctors, as is pretty logical. I mean, yes, healthy people go to the doctor to make sure that they're still healthy or seemingly healthy, but the doctor can't do anything really for a healthy person. There's no problem with them. However, when there's a sick person that needs a doctor, the doctor can do something for them because that's what he's there for, to help the sick people become healthy people. So Jesus says, "Why am I eating with these people? Because these are the people that need me. You think you're good in your righteousness, and as John told them way back then, you think you're good just simply because you're from our father Abraham. You think you're fine. You think you're righteous. But John said you need to repent. And if you truly are righteous, great. I'm not here for the righteous people. I'm here for the people that need to become righteous. The publicans and the sinners," which the Pharisees and scribes were part of that group. They just didn't think they were part of that group. Now, one might think, hey, that's going to shut them up. They're going to quit talking now that Jesus has responded. But no. Nope, verse 33. "And they said unto him," again, at first they pulled the disciples aside and talked to them. Jesus responds to him, and so the Pharisees and scribes are like, "All right, we're dealing with this guy then now." So they respond directly to Jesus with this question. "Why do the disciples of John fast often and make prayers, and likewise the disciples of the Pharisees, but thine eat and drink?" He said unto them, "Can ye make the children of the bride chamber fast while the bridegroom is with them? But the days will come when the bridegroom shall be taken away from them, and then shall they fast in those days." So the second thing in this passage that disrupts the Pharisees and scribes was the fact that not only was he freely feasting with all these people, but he's foregoing fasting. They haven't seen him fasting. So, since they couldn't nail him on eating with publicans and sinners, they turned the table with the next trick. Well, how about the fact that you're eating and drinking, and John and his disciples that supposedly was coming to set the stage for you, they're not out there living it up, eating and drinking with all these people. They're fasting. So Jesus alludes to a wedding. Weddings, especially in those days, were huge celebrations. They lasted for days and days and days. And as you prepared for the wedding feast, you would know that you're going to consume more food than you normally would. You'd be drinking more than you normally would. So in preparation for the big feast, you'd maybe fast to shed a few pounds in preparation for the big meal that I'm going to eat. We even see that today. Oh, I know I'm going to be going to do this, so I'm going to eat conservatively here because I'm going to have a little bit more extra here. So that would be in preparation for what is coming in the future. And as the time of the wedding would draw closer and closer, remember, in the weddings of those days, they didn't necessarily know when the groom was going to show up for the wedding. They were the groom and the bride, the agreement would happen, the engagement, if you will, the betrothal would happen, and then the groom would go away to prepare a place for the bride. And we can get into that in John 14, I think it is, where the groom goes away to prepare the place for his bride. And then he's going to come for the wedding, but they don't know when. So they're getting ready, they're preparing, they're waiting for the groom to show up. Now, if you've studied the Bible for any length of time, you can hear alarm bells going off about, well, I've gone to prepare a place for you, which I've not told you, and we can go down that rabbit trail, but we're not going to. So there's excitement gathering as every day passes, and maybe today's the day he's going to show up. Maybe today's the day he's going to show up. So they're waiting, and they don't know when. But the second the groom arrived, the word goes out, the people come in, the joyous celebration begins, we're about to have the wedding. See, you look forward to the coming of the groom, but the joy is not in waiting for the groom. The joy is found when the groom arrives, because then we can celebrate. John and his disciples fasted because Jesus wasn't there. They were waiting for the joyous celebration to take place when Jesus came. Now, of course, they misunderstood this a little bit in the fact that they didn't realize Jesus was coming to die. They thought he was coming to establish a throne and rule forever. They didn't realize there would be this interluding time in between. Jesus takes it even farther and uncovers the mystery that one day I'm not going to be here. And in those days, then you're going to fast, looking forward to the fact when the groom is going to show up for the bride, the church. They would be waiting in anticipation of when he comes. And in doing so, they would fast in preparation for the joyous celebration when the groom came. See, we can have joy now knowing we're part of the bride. We are part of his bride. We know the groom is coming. We don't know when the groom is coming, but we know that with each day that passes, and I saw somebody put a thing up on Facebook that the only good thing about time change is that we're 1 hour closer to Jesus' return in a blink of an eye. The day is coming when we'll be with him. And all the trials and fasting that we've done here are going to be worth it because then we get to face the joy of being with him forever. So Jesus interacts with them on these two problems, these two questions they have. And then Jesus turns and he explains more to them and helps them really understand what's going on. He tells them a parable. This is the first recorded parable in the Gospel of Luke. Now, to help us understand, a parable is a comparison. The more literal meaning is to cast alongside or to put side by side, to lay side by side. The point is to use one thing to illustrate the other thing, and Jesus often used real-world examples of what they would do in order to point out a truth, a heavenly truth that they needed to understand. His own disciples asked him in Matthew 13, "Why do you speak to us in parables?" And his response was, at least in part to them, was so that they, the disciples, and anyone else who wanted to know the truth, would be able to see and understand the truth through the use of an illustration. That's why illustrations are still very helpful and understandable things. When I illustrate something, it puts it side by side, and the light bulbs can kind of click on, and you can realize things in a more helpful way. So, the parable Jesus gives is in verse 36. And he spake a parable unto them. No man putteth a piece of new garment upon an old, if otherwise both then the new maketh a rent, and the piece that was taken out of the new agreeth not with the old. And no man putteth new wine into old bottles, lest the new wine will burst the bottles and be spilled, and the bottles shall perish. The new wine must be put in new bottles, and both are preserved. No man also having drunk old wine straightway desireth new, for he saith the old is better. So, the next point would be failed fabrics and futile fermentation. Had fun with F's this week, apparently. Failed fabrics. The way that verse 16 is worded is kind of confusing and choppy. The CSB words it this way to help us a little bit understand. He also told them a parable. No one tears a patch from a new garment, puts it on an old garment. Otherwise, not only will he tear the new, but also the piece from the new will not match the old. That's what he's saying in verse 16. So if you recall, in Jesus' day, way back then, there was far less wealth, far less access to have items laying around. You didn't just have extra clothes laying around. You didn't have 4 suits in the closet to go to and say, oh, which one am I going to wear today? Yeah, some wealthy people did, but others that didn't. Because people were poor, because material wasn't just as readily available, what some people would do is when an old garment got a hole in it, rather than throw out the old garment and get a new garment, they would take a piece of new fabric, cut out a portion from that, and try and sew it on and patch it onto the old garment. The problem with this, as Jesus says, is multifaceted. First, not only do you ruin the new garment by cutting it up, it becomes evident that the new pattern doesn't match the old garment, and it's clear that you have this clash of the two one-to-one. It just doesn't work. It doesn't go together. So that is failed fabric. Secondly, he talks about futile fermentation. In those days, wine is mainly stored in bottles, not made of pottery, but of animal skins. One of the properties of animal skins was that they could withstand the pressure of wine fermenting and becoming alcoholic. However, the catch is, when you use a wineskin, for new wine, it expands. And you can only expand so much. And once the animal skin has expanded in the fermentation process, it loses its elasticity, and so it won't go back to the same size. Maybe it will once or twice or 3 times, but as it loses its elasticity, it is unable to be used for new wine. It would be useless. But if you wanted to buck the system, you could. You could put new wine into old wineskins. But when that wine would ferment, the pressure built up inside the wineskin would burst because it didn't have any elasticity. It could not hold it. It couldn't stretch beyond where it had already stretched. And then your wineskin is burst and destroyed, and your wine is spilled, and you lose out on both accounts. But Jesus says, no, you don't do that. You put new wine in new wineskins, and then both are preserved. You have the new wineskin and the new wine, and it's preserved. To top it off, those that drink old wine don't suddenly have the desire and say, hey, yeah, bring me new wine. No, they say, I like the old stuff. Bring me the old stuff. If I've drank 100-year-old wine all the time, I'm not going to want 20-year-old wine. I want the old stuff because that's the taste I've developed for. Just like you do not put new garments on old garments, you don't put new wine into old wineskins, and you don't desire new wine over old wine. First, we saw Levi, a tax collector. He forsook everything to follow Jesus. Then we see Jesus respond to the Pharisees regarding free feast and foregoing fast. Then we see Jesus teach a lesson about failed fabrics and futile fermentation. And finally, number 4, frustrated Pharisees in foiling Jesus. Sorry, I had to use the F for foiling Jesus. It had to work. The culmination of last week's message, today's message, and next week's message, which will go from verses 1 through 11 of chapter 6, specifically in verse 11, it says, and they were filled with madness and communed one with another what they might do to Jesus. So the end of these 3 messages is going to end in this. Pharisees and scribes filled with madness, communed with one another what they might do to Jesus. Based on the truth that Jesus revealed, they made the determination that we have to foil, we have to upset Jesus. We got to stop whatever this guy's trying to do. We can't let him continue. Now, the irony is the fact that their stopping Jesus was, in effect, accomplishing what Jesus came to do. So they failed, but they worked. They got it done. The comparison that Jesus is making with these parables, what he's laying alongside, is why they had to get him out of the picture. So we have to ask, what's the comparison and how does it apply to us? So I put it all on one slide, probably a little small to read. Taking the new covenant that Jesus was ushering in and trying to shove that new covenant into the Pharisees and scribes' old way of doing things with rules and regulation that said, you can't eat with these people, publicans and sinners. You can't talk to their kind. You got to fast at this time, and you got to give this much, and you have to go to this place at this time and do this thing. All their rules and regulations, trying to take the new covenant Jesus was bringing and shove it into there, trying to add the new to the old, is completely and utterly incompatible. All you're going to do is you're going to rip the new, you're going to stain the old, all you're going to do is ruin the old and spill the new, and when you're stuck in the old, you refuse to accept the new. Let me clarify this a little better. He was laying this parallel, there you go, I guess, parable, alongside of the Pharisees and scribes' desire to keep doing things the same way we've always done things. And if there's going to be something new come along, that new thing is fine to come along, but it's got to fit within how we've always done things. There you go. That's not how we do things. The title of the message and the messages. That's not how we do them. It doesn't fit in how we do things. Jesus tells them that their works-based religion, their Pharisaism, with its 613 laws that everybody's got to follow, you got to go here, you got to wear this, you got to give this, you got to do this at this time, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, as exhausting as it is not going to get them where they want to go. It's the same thing. Just as their religion wasn't going to get them where they wanted to go, the same is true for every other works-based religion today. You have Hinduism, you got Buddhism, you got hedonism, you got environmentalism, you have humanism, Judaism itself, Mormonism, Islam, Catholicism, atheism, and all the isms that you want to put in there, they're all works-based. You have to do this to get this result. Whether or not the goal is to get to heaven or not, that's not necessarily in the question. Some are to get to heaven, some are to make the earth a better place and to have utopia on earth. But that's not the goal. That's the goal of them, but all their works-based things are not going to get them to their goal. The thing is, adding Jesus to any kind of works-based system is not going to work. You can't just add Jesus right in with your 613 laws and it's all going to be compatible and work together. That's not how it is. Because if you add Jesus, the new, into the old, you're going to clearly show off new and old, they're not going to match. You're going to burst the old system. You're going to spill the new system. You're going to lose out on Jesus in the long run. They're not compatible. They won't work. You're either going to embrace Jesus in the new, or you're going to remain stuck in the old. Jesus did not come to push on them, you need to do these works now and get rid of your old works. Instead, he came and said, no. Follow me. Have faith in me. Believe in me, and you'll be saved. That's all you got to do. Follow me. The Pharisees would be quick to say, yeah, do what Jesus said. Have faith in him, believe in him, but do the work still. Don't let go of the works. You got to do them both. And Jesus says, no. Faith, not works. You cannot add Jesus to your religion. You have to leave everything behind in order to follow Jesus, just like Levi. Just like he did with Levi, Jesus has called on you and on me to follow him. So we must give up all of our works, all of our potential that we might think might get us to heaven someday. Whatever you're trying to do in this world to make the utopia, we got to give up all our works. We got to follow Jesus. None of what we do is ever going to get us anywhere. It's all going to perish. And just as Jesus said to Levi, follow me, today he's calling on you to follow him if you have not. Romans 10:9, that if thou shalt confess with thy mouth the Lord Jesus, and shalt believe in thine heart that God hath raised him from the dead, thou shalt be saved. And then 3 verses later, for whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. Now, we ask the question, I've already believed, I've already followed Jesus, so then what about me? What is the application for me? First application is this. Don't try to add works back to Jesus. We can be quick to do this. We come out of a works-based religion, get to Jesus, give up the old works, believe on Jesus, and then somehow we get sidetracked along the way and start saying, oh, well, we got to do this. We got to come to church at this time. We got to wear these clothes at this time. We got to give this 10%. We got to do this, and we got to do this, and we got to exclude those people because they just don't do things the way that we do things. That's why Paul mentions in Galatians and Colossians, stop adding rules and regulations to how you've already been freed and what you've been freed to do. A lot of times in the world today, we find out you have to join our church, you got to use our Bible version. You have to take part of our communion in the way we take communion. It can't be any other way you do communion. In order to worship God, you got to pray like this, and you got to sing only these songs. You can't sing any of these songs. If you're seen in this kind of place, you're an outcast. If you drink that, or you eat that, or you go there, you're a problem. You're not allowed in our assembly. It's not Jesus then works, but Jesus and nothing. Just Jesus. Now, I'm not trying to say throw out works and you're not supposed to. Don't get me wrong. There's a place for works after salvation, but it's not works to get to Jesus, and it's not works to somehow exclude others and add others and stuff like that. It's works that show, yes, I am following Jesus, and that's all I'm doing is following Jesus, and these things are just a fruit of me following Jesus. So for those of us that have been saved, we face a distinct temptation to add works back to Jesus on the back end of it. Now the opposite of that would be those that Jude confronts, the antinomians that said, oh, you got Jesus, you're good. Go do whatever you want to do. Eat whatever you want, drink whatever you want, sleep with whoever you want, all these other things that you can do. You can do anything because you got Jesus, you're good to go. That's not the topic for today. We'll get to that this summer. The second application, first, don't try to add works back to Jesus. Second, realize just because things are done differently elsewhere doesn't make them wrong. Just because another church does things in a different manner than our church doesn't necessarily mean we're wrong and doesn't necessarily mean they're wrong, but that God works in far greater and more magnificent ways than we could ever fully grasp or understand. We have to be careful not to adopt the attitude of the Pharisees and scribes that says, well, that's not how we do things. That doesn't fit into our system of doing things. Therefore, that can't be right. Just because it's old doesn't necessarily mean it's better. And just because it's new doesn't necessarily mean it's worse. Just because things are done differently elsewhere doesn't necessarily make them wrong. The third application is this. Be gracious, and to top it off, be gracious. The tendency is to be the man in verse 39. No man having drunk old wine straightway desireth new, for he saith the old is better. The man in verse 39 has drank the old wine. He likes the old wine. That's what he knows. That's what he grew up with. That's how it's always been. So that's what we're going to do. He doesn't say, oh, yeah, give me some of the new stuff. Yeah, I want some of the new stuff right after he's had the old stuff. Yes, there is a slight problem with that view. But here's the thing. Just as the person with the desire and preference for the old should be gracious with the person that has the new, the person that has the new should also be gracious with the person that likes the old. Both sides must always be gracious one with another. We must realize that change is necessary, but we must be gracious when and as we change. When I was a dispatcher in Oklahoma, though I already leaned somewhat toward liking things to stay the same way, as a dispatcher, it made me more anti-change, hating change. There's something about the extreme effects of high-stress situations that cause that and the trauma that comes along with it that wires your brain to have things controlled and the same all the same time. So struggling with little changes was difficult for me in my time because I term it controlled change. I can deal with the controlled change. It's the uncontrolled change that was a problem. If I planned for the possibility of change, I can deal with that. It's the problem that comes when I'm not planning for change and change happens. Then I can't. It's difficult to rectify that situation. To change something without warning would throw the whole day into a tailspin. When they tried to change things at work, and when they tried to change how you answer this phone and how you do this thing, and when you tried to change that, all of us would raise a big fuss about it because we don't like things to change. We like things the way that they are. We want things to stay how they've always been. That's what we know. That's what we like. Don't bring in new stuff. Don't try and change the way we've been doing things. Again, we have to realize change is necessary, and we must be gracious when and as things change. The Pharisees and scribes could not handle the change. I think that was an icicle that fell off the roof out there. That's probably what it was. The Pharisees and scribes could not handle the change that Jesus was bringing. And Jesus is going to spend 3 years on earth, 3 years, trying to explain it to them and help them understand and lay parable by parable and show them the truth. And all these things he was doing, don't know what's going on with my throat today. All these things he was doing is trying to change things for the better, to bring about salvation, to put an end to all the old rules and regulations and have Jesus. But they refused because that's just not how we do things. And therefore, because it's new, even though Jesus predated every single one of them, they had to get rid of it. And there goes another icicle over there. They had to get rid of it because that's just not how things